Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bedard's unofficial podcast. And today's a great day where we have two esteemed guests with me. First, we have Stephen Riley, author of the newly released book, God's Paddlers. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
And also with us, we have Dr. Jim Arnold from Saskatoon.
Well, I'll say
Say,
good morning, but it's not necessarily good morning for everyone. Some of us are in the evening, I understand.
Good. Well, anyway, welcome, guys. And today we're going to talk about God's Paddlers and some of the things in there. Exciting book. Uh, it's been getting a lot of good reviews from folks. It apparently is well edited. That's what I've heard. I haven't heard anybody say, Stephen, that it's well written, but lots of people are telling me it's well edited.
It's riveting. It's riveting.
Three guesses who edited.
Well, anyway. So, but what I want to know, and I think what we need to establish, this book took a long time to get to market, right? And Stephen, what the hell was your journey? I mean, it was really a canoe trip, so to speak.
I'll try to condense that as much as I can. All right, it was a long journey. It started back, and believe it or not, in 1977. I wrote a story for one of the Winnipeg newspapers that I worked for at the time, and I met a former student, Ted Spear, who had been at St. John's north of Selkirk back in the 70s. And he told me after I'd done the interview with him and the story was in print and all that, Ted told me, Stephen, what you got to do, wait a few years, talk to the alumni and the former staff and all that when they've had time to digest the meaning of what the whole experience had been for them. So I waited. I didn't do anything, minded my own business. And then in about 1989, when by that time, I was a television producer with a current affairs program with CBC Winnipeg. Our newsroom got a phone call from a mother who was very upset, very upset. Her son had witnessed a beating on a bus from St. John's going into the city of Winnipeg. And I grabbed a reporter. We went out there, spoke with the woman, and the reporter and I, Lavon Butcher was the reporter. And we decided to do two things. One, let's get that news story out there. What's happening here? Contact the RCMP, et cetera, et cetera. That was the news angle. The other thing was, as a current affairs producer, I thought, let's wait a second. Let's find out what that school's all about. Let's take some time. Let's do what Ted Spear had suggested years before. Why don't we talk to some of the folks who had gone through the whole process? So that started my journey in 1989. We did the news story. It provoked a pretty negative response from the people at St. John's. That's because we knew what had happened inside. We talked with the kids who had witnessed this whole thing. The RCMP eventually, within a matter of 2 or 3 months, it took a while, charged several students, about a half a dozen, with assault, with beating this other student up. And we just learned from that, from talking with them and with other former students, because by this time it was a current affairs program. My reporter for that was Robert Enright, one of the finest television reporters in Western Canada.
Can you guys, before, I don't mean to interrupt you, but for our listeners, I see James Arnold shaking his head about Robert Enright. And can you guys tell me a little bit, about him?
Robert Enright is extremely well known. He's got an extremely poised, well-informed, when he did interviews, this was somebody you listened to. And he's also one of those fellows that if you ever emailed him or sent him something and said, I have a comment about your program, he'd respond within a couple of days, always. Very good fellow, very skilled, very poised, extremely well known in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm nodding.
but I mean, and that's pretty good. You obviously that's unsolicited praise, right? The
Mm.
guy you were working with, a pretty very interesting guy there, Steve. And
I've never met him, but I have sent him emails multiple times. And, you send one, he responds. You're going to send him more, just making comments, ask them questions.
So the team of Riley and Enright go in.
Yeah. Yeah, there was quite a bit of research ahead of time. There was, what we call pre-interviews to decide basically whether an individual was articulate, knew what they were talking about, was informed. This now we're talking here not about students who are 14, 15, 18 years old. This is 1990, 89, 90, and they're all mature. They're all grown up. So we had to track them down. And so we did that. And what we found was pretty disturbing. Right off the top, it was, oh yeah, those beatings like that. And then somebody raised the question of the what's his name, William Golding's the book Lord of the Flies, in which students in an isolated environment set upon one another, in groups or whatever, and it's students abusing students, beating them and whatever, and worse. And we heard about this. This was very disturbing indeed. I produced a story with Robert's help. He was just an incisive journalist and a dear friend for all these years. But anyways, we went ahead with that, and the school got even more upset. We had given them an opportunity to respond, which they did in the current affairs program, even to the point where the headmaster of the school at the time, you'll remind me of his
Bruce
name,
Hanford.
Bruce Hanford. Even to the point where at one point of the interview, he broke down. It was quite difficult for him because he was talking about students who he respected. I think he had written letters to the mother of the boy right at the start, who had started the whole thing. And his letters were self-serving. They were not good letters, not at all. From what we knew about what had been happening in the school, he had, as we say, he wouldn't say shit and he had a mouthful. It's too bad because I liked the guy.
I actually knew Mr. Hanford also. He's a nice man. I
He
mean,
was, yeah,
it's not a bad
yeah.
person per se, but
No,
yeah, it was a
no, no.
bad situation, no doubt.
Absolutely a bad situation because a few months later, the school collapsed, and it claimed a large part of that was as a result of bad publicity. Interpretation, me and Robert, CBC. What we later found out, and by this stage, once the documentary had aired, the school closed in June of 1990. Once the documentary aired, we got responses from quite a few other former students. And at that stage, I thought to myself, boy, I'll tell you what, there's more to this thing. I mean, this is the school. I remembered that. This is the school um, whose Ontario branch, um, the boys from whom in 1978, 13 young people drowned at Lake Temiskaming. So there was that. There was the Lord of the Flies abuse. There was what the boys tended to call swats, which were beatings. And there were a lot of beatings. Some of those boys would endure 300, 400 beatings in a year. That is to say, individual strikes with a wooden paddle and all. I know that some of the people who are watching the podcast will be familiar with this kind of stuff. Some of this stuff is not new to them. But what is new is that when I started the research for this, I decided I would write the book. I would do the book. I would do it thoroughly. I would get confirmation on everything. And I would explain what happened at Temiskaming through what had gone before. In other words, what kind of a school had this kind of an outdoor program and such a strong academic approach, a unique one, and was religiously based and everything that would provoke the kind of things, that these kids were talking about. these former students. So that's how it all started. That's how it all started. And it went on for a few years. The pause in the whole thing. I mean, I was researching up until about 1997 and started serious writing at about that time. I got an offer from the BBC in Northern Ireland, where I kind of lived a second life from when I was married back in the late 60s. I got an offer from them where I had some contacts anyways, and I couldn't refuse it. It was too good, too good to turn down. And we upped stakes and took the kids, and my wife and I headed back to Northern Ireland. And we've been there since 2000. This is my home now. Has been for quite a while. And I couldn't, once I made the commitment to BBC, I couldn't spare the time that and the energy that it took, to say nothing of the distance. You know, you got all those miles between me and my subject matter. This was somewhat difficult. To top it off, James Raffin, a well-known outdoors writer in Canada, had been researching Temiskaming, Lake Temiskaming, the tragedy, and his book came out in 2000, 2002, 2000, I think. So kind of stole my thunder, only to the extent that he was dealing with Temiskaming. He had dealt a little bit as well in the book. It's a good book, by the way. I call it Deep Waters. But so kind of stole my thunder, and I got a little discouraged at that point. However, I picked it up, moved along, continued contacting publishers. I wasn't as successful as I'd hoped I would be. It's a fine, strong story, but they wouldn't bite. So
You
I just
know,
left it. Sent all my
mainstream
research,
publishers, mainstream media.
mainstream media. Yeah, I sent all my,
As
about 5 years ago, I sent all my, not all my research, but 90% of my research to the archives in Ottawa, where they are sitting awaiting interest from whoever wants. Meanwhile, I continued writing the book. I got a call from you, Pierre, who had somehow found out, I can't even remember all that stuff now, found out about it about a year and a half ago. And we continued, and now it's been published as a non-mainstream, self-published
no, I
enterprise.
digress. It's published, you have the excellent publisher Ennui Press,
Yes, we do.
who is doing this
Yeah,
book. They're a very
yeah,
fine
my
publishing house.
mistake. Oh, I've heard so much about Ennui Press from somebody who's
Ennui
fairly
Press has
closely
published
connected
other
with it.
things. It's
Yeah.
published other things. It's not like a one-time publisher.
Yeah,
True
that's
enough.
true.
True enough. So as I say, I digress. I'm all finished. That's how it all started. I'm taking up too much time.
No, not at all. I mean, it's interesting to note that the book sat and matured in your files for a while. I think for me, what prompted my interest in working with you on the project was really the research and the stories, things I did not know. And if I don't know it, others don't know it. And if I find it interesting, I find that others might find it interesting. There's just a lot of backstory, and it was well written. I mean,
If I could say, and I shan't talk any further about the generalities of the book itself, but the strongest points that I felt, the process in the book that helped to make, in a big way, helped to make the book what it's become, for better or for worse, is the access that I had to documents. I was able to access documents from a number of sources, former staff, former students, especially former staff, between 6 and 8 really key people who helped me with materials that they had squirreled away and said, oh, have you got this yet? And here's a letter from so-and-so to so-and-so. Have you seen that? As well as access to St. John's Cathedral in Winnipeg, which had an archive of not all the materials, but a lot of the materials from the Selkirk School, which incorporated some of the stuff from Ontario School and the Alberta School. So there was research based on documentation, inside stories, which the public had never seen. They had never seen this material. There are hundreds of documents, hundreds of them.
And I'm going to throw in, you did first-person interviews as well.
Yes, and that was the other part. That was the other part of it, Jane. I'm glad you said that rather than me. Yeah. The other were first-person interviews, of which I think they numbered about, in the end, about 70 interviews altogether, of people who were supporters, critics, former teachers, clergy, organizers, especially the former students. So, and all that came together between the documents and the interviews. That was what I believe gave the book its strength.
Well, and think about it here. We have all of these multiple sources of data. You've got documents from multiple places where people have squirreled them away in their basement or somewhere else, and they've, given them to you. You've got things from church, you've got things from supporters and critics, you've got teachers, you've got people who are behind the scenes involved in funding and fundraising, and then you've got former students who are talking with you. The convergence of all of these sources of data, and thankfully you've done it before everybody is underground. We're all getting older. The schools have been closed for a long time now. It's really important to have this in a collected place that you can go to and say, okay, I've got this, I'm afraid, a fairly weighty book because it has so much documentation. But this is really, really important to collect it all in one spot. And it's such a credit to you, and then such a resource for everyone that has been involved with St. John's. And then more than that, we're dealing with a whole number of religious-based schools that are being investigated for various things, mishaps, crimes, abuse of students, everything from there's lawsuits, there's criminal trials of religiously based schools that had ideologies that isolated them from the world, and are now moving forward. So it's one of a number, but this is probably the best documented, that I've seen. I'm going to speak from a professional capacity. Those who don't know, I'm a clinical psychologist in practice for about 40 years. And when they started doing impetus for you and I to speak, I think residential schools.
No, your sound cut out.
Oh, sorry. I started
good.
doing assessments for the Indian residential school things in Canada. And I realized that what the Indian residential schools had going was very similar, without the racism, but very similar to what I had experienced at St. John's. So we have a series of schools in Canada that are well documented in this book and are basically a bellwether or an indicator of what goes on in such institutions. So it's very important from that broad societal perspective to understand how an ideological religious school can go forward and have all of these kinds of things happen. I mean, St. John's is special because of its outdoor program, and we'll get into that. But it's very, very important.
Well, thanks for that stuff. Pretty good introduction to what I wrote, but I hasten to add that to say, if I haven't already, that I depended so much on the goodwill of people who trusted me to tell, sometimes in a very personal situations that were quite difficult for them. I'm talking now, for example, of the parents of the and brothers and sisters of the boys who drowned in Lake Temiskaming, where in a bar or in their living room or their kitchens, where on a number of occasions people broke down in trying to assess, or trying to go back and deal with what had happened to their families, to their boys. It was, not the least of those, by the way, was the co-founder of the school, Ted Byfield, with whom I did 3 lengthy interviews on 3 separate occasions out in Alberta, and was a guest in his home overnight, and these were very critical, very good interviews. And when I say good, not necessarily from my point of view, but from Ted Byfield, that he was clear. Some of his stuff was very difficult for him to, as he called them. If you want a confession, Stephen, here's the confession. At those
Let's say a
points.
little bit about who Ted Byfield is and why he's such a big deal.
Yeah. Well, as I say, he was a co-founder of the schools along with Frank Wiens. Byfield was a legend in Western Canadian journalism as a mugwump, a redneck by his description. Very conservative, religiously conservative, personally conservative, anti-liberal, very anti-liberal,
Politically
and
connected.
oh yeah,
You
absolutely. In
know, if
fact,
we
he had
look at
been.
the Reform Party, Preston Manning in Alberta, and that whole business, integrally involved with the merger of the two Reform and the Progressive Conservatives into the Conservative Party, behind all, you know, on first name basis with people like Stephen Harper and Pierre Poilievre.
Absolutely. This guy was as close to power as you can get without being elected. In fact, he was mooted as a possible candidate for the leadership of the Reform Party at one point. And his son Link, the late son Link, who was a carbon copy of his old man, was very influential in the formation of the Wild Rose Party, which was even further to the right than the Reform Party. Very strongly connected, absolutely politically close to power, and a legend in his own time as well. I mean, he published a magazine which folded, and another one which folded too. They kept changing the titles to the Alberta Report until finally it collapsed altogether. But very lively writing, strong stuff from the conservative aspect. Had the liberals, small L liberals, on the run constantly because he was so outrageous. But for all that, he was a man with a great sense of humor, great company, all kinds of things. As much as I disagreed with him philosophically, um, he was enjoyable, very hospitable to be with him and his wife Ginger. An amazing man. Frank Wiens was another kettle of fish. He's very conservative, but very suspicious of me. No matter how I tried to reassure him,
Not sure I blame him, Stephen. Not
What's
sure I
that?
blame him.
You're pretty shifty sometimes, you
Yeah.
know. You media people.
Frank was a good judge of character.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, I knew
I
Frank
guess.
Wiens personally,
Yeah.
and I mean, you did too, obviously, Stephen. But as a student, I was there when he was headmaster.
I met
And
him and met his, you know, I was in school with one of his sons, actually. So
who, Kevin?
he was sent to Alberta. Yeah, I was in
Mm.
initially was sleeping right beside him until there was a kerfuffle in the dorm and they moved us around. But
Well, I knew Frank to be, look, Frank was the operations guy. I mean, he kept the school running by hook or crook. And for the ultimate punishment, for instance, the way the school was set up, if you were busted running away, i.e., a lot of kids ran away, took off down the road. It was very much, you know, we bring up movies, but Cool Hand Luke, you know, A Night in the Box, you know, failure to communicate, all that shit and in fact, Cool Hand Luke was played a lot at movie night, which everybody could relate to because, you know, the school was pretty much like a prison.
that's actually where I hadn't thought of that until you mentioned it, but I did see Cool Hand Luke at St. John's.
Of course, it's the ultimate prison camp movie, you know, and it's a complete struggle. And anyway, the whole thing with Cool Hand Luke and of course Deliverance, you got to throw Deliverance in there, you know, based on the canoeing, was that it was a society, and at the top of that society was Frank. And if you ran away, you came back in and got 10 swats, but there were 10 of the best. They were from Frank Wiens, and the son of a bitch knew how to swat. I mean, he was
For those who don't know, so some people listening to this podcast may not know what SWATs entail. This entails getting a piece of lumber, probably about 2 feet long, 24 inches, could be longer. They're not very wide typically, maybe 3-4 inches wide. And you stand holding your knees and they crack you over the backside as hard as they can.
For however many SWATs that you've infringed on or you've been awarded, whether it was for smoking, running away, talking back, not doing your duty, leaving clothes out in the hallway where it's found with your laundry number in it. You name it, you can get swatted for it. And of course, the ubiquitous SWAT tests, where for every answer wrong. And Stephen, I got to say, with your academic credentials, you would have really had a hard time. You'd get beat. You'd get one beat for every
I can
answer wrong.
I can actually write out, maybe I can't and I'd get swatted for it, but I could write out in Flanders Fields with all the correct punctuation, because you were only allowed 5 mistakes, and you got a swat for everyone more than that, because they were forgiving about the punctuation. If it was a word or a phrase, no, that's another matter. It was the punctuation that was, you got 5
Wow.
forgiveness.
There was a SWAT economy per se, and and by the way, I know you talked about it as beatings. Beatings, I mean, this is just my terminology for what it's worth, whether right or wrong, but beatings was between the students. SWATs were SWATs.
Well, I'm just going to throw in that several times, and I can name both Maunder and Folletti, the 2 masters, Mr. Maunder and Mr. Folletti, when they were, saying, okay, we've got people who've made mistakes. I looked at them directly and you're going to beat me for that.
Yes. Yes, they are.
And they would look aghast and say, no, SWATs.
And they wondered
Really?
why
Wow.
they wondered why they recruited masters toward the end who liked to beat young boys and adolescents. I mean, they outwardly thought about, like, how did that happen?
I'm going to pick up on something that Stephen said earlier, and it's kind of touched on. These are nice people. Okay, they seem to be nice people, and then things like people, students dying. We have Temiskaming, and we have somebody dying on a snowshoe run. We have people with injury, and nice people who thought they were doing disaster happened, and then disaster happened, and the nice people doing nice things, then disaster happens, and they're not entitled to be nice people in that context. They understand the risks, yet ignored them. And this is one of the themes that comes out to me as a student, but also in reading the book. They knew better. They didn't think it was important to know better. They thought faith in God and doing things within the philosophy of St. John's was going to save them. And frankly, they got away with it. They got away with it a lot. It reminds me of people who are drunk, drinking and driving. They may drive 60 times, and then on the 61st time, they hit somebody and kill them. You can get away with a lot of risk as long as the actual situations where the risks will give you a bad consequence don't arise.
Every student I've spoken with after my time at St. John's, every one of them, if you ask them, they were all in situations where it was 10 seconds away from becoming a Temiskaming.
Yes.
Where it was 10 seconds from disaster, whether it was going over a waterfall, whether it was going down an open sluice in a dam, whether it was being lost on Lake Winnipeg in the middle of a blizzard. I mean, you name it.
Frozen cold, frozen cold shooting across an open space, in the midst of
your noise is really bad, man. But what you were saying is basically getting frozen. I mean, I can just point, we're on video, so I've frozen this area, I've frozen here, I froze every one of the tips of my fingers. I've, pulled innumerable muscles. I'm pretty sure I had major muscle tears by the time I left there from snowshoeing, just from, repeated stuff. I suffered second-degree burns on both my forearms on the last day of the Grand Portage because I didn't wear sunscreen. What was sunscreen?
We didn't have sunscreen,
No.
did we? I don't even know that it existed. I mean, they would bring out the Nivea in the bottles or jars of Nivea cream in the evening, and if you thought you were sunburned, they'd throw a bunch on you, and then you went to sleep and you got it all over your sleeping bag, so we didn't do it.
I have 2 holes in my feet, like it's almost like stigmata. I lost my this is bizarre, but I lost my socks going through a swamp and put on canvas runners, tennis shoes, those old Chuck Jordan types that they used to have. And it literally bore holes in the same place on both feet where the leather just, ripped into my feet. So, yeah, I've been scarred, and I only went 2 years. Well, let's be clear. I was only there 2 years.
If we're talking about residual, I've got my big toe on my right foot. I had a condition called tenosynovitis, which means the tendon is inflamed from running through the tendon sheath. And I actually was pulled for a week from one snowshoe run because it had been inflamed. And the school had taken me to a physician, doc in Stony Plain, who said I was fine. But there was a break to go home. I can't remember. It was maybe Remembrance Day, or no, it was after that. It must have been in the new year. Whatever brief break that there was somewhere in the new year. And my parents took me to a doc who said, no, you've got tenosynovitis. You need to have some time off. So I went back to the school, and it was almost how dare you go to an outside physician to have that looked at. And currently I'm dealing with that particular toe that is still here I am, an older adult, and that injury, that inflammation is now giving me grief. I'm having difficulty if I walk too far, or take the dog up the mountainside too much. So St. John's did stuff to us.
Yes, absolutely. I can tell you of a student, of course, that it's known to I suppose many of the former alumni in Alberta. I can tell you of a student who has no problem at all with his toes,
Yes.
to the extent that he doesn't have any, because the fronts of both his feet were chopped off. They were amputated, and his name is Matt Riddle.
Yeah.
And on one of the dog team runs, the feet were frozen.
Yeah.
And after a period of a few days, and they realized what the situation was in the hospital, they amputated the fronts of his feet.
Well, the thing about freezing your feet is they hurt for a while, then they stop hurting, and you think, okay, I got to keep going. So you keep going, and you don't know that you frostbitten them until you stop, and you go, oh, well, look at those toes.
When I was, again, during the research, I was able to talk with Matt and his mother and get access to their medical records and their legal records as well, because he sued the school and settled out of court. But it also gave me an opportunity to find out about some of this stuff. What is what means frozen feet? What's all of the medical terminology and the symptoms and all this. And the same thing with hypothermia. I had to go to expert, didn't have to. I wanted to go to experts in hypothermia, 3 of them in all, and quite a few, different magazines and such books that talked about hypothermia, because our knowledge of hypothermia, along with frozen limbs and everything, the medical progress of these changes from year to year gets better and better. But what happened with some of these things here was just, to me, it was terrible to go through this stuff. One thing I'm going to qualify all of this, if I can, a bit. Okay, just qualify it. I never went to St. John's. I don't hate St. John's. I've got no axe to grind that way. I'm not interested in it. It doesn't. However, when I come on something that is out of character, for example, a school that doesn't do normally what you expect a normal school to do, um, it tweaks my curiosity. And if I find out about it, and the more I find out about it, the stranger it gets. That to me, as a storyteller, which I've done as a career for 40 odd years, that is a story, right? Do I have an axe to grind against St. John's? Can't be bothered. Why? Why? Their documents, their internal documents, and the students and former staff that I spoke with and interviewed at great length over a period of time, traveling all the way from Vancouver Island to England, and everywhere in Canada in between, not everywhere, almost everywhere, but Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, all of that stuff brought it together. But I can't dismiss the idea that, you know what, there are students and you can't disagree with them if they felt they had a good education, if they felt it was good for them, and they stand back and say to me, Stephen, you can talk about all this stuff about the canoes tipping over, and all this kind of carry on and the frostbite and all that. But I'll tell you what, I had a hell of a good time and it taught me a lot of stuff and da 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 da. What am I going to do? Am I going to deny that? Not at all. But you know what? Where there are exceptions, and there were a lot of them, including the 13 boys who drowned at Lake Temiskaming, you've got to sit back and say, what the hell was going on here? What the hell was going on? Going back to what you said, James, that these were decent people doing what they thought they should do because the school or whatever said they were right. That should turn our conversation a bit today, perhaps, to the point of, well, they were supported by the Anglican Church. I mean, these guys have got some kind of duty of care, don't they? I mean, were they run by the Anglican Church? No, they weren't run by the Anglican Church. But let's
They
turn
were
that.
kind of sort of run by the Anglican Church in the typical way. And I've been in, I'll call it church land.
Call it
So
what?
I'll say that I was in church land for a while, for a good spell of life. We had children. You raised them in the time frame that we raised them, and you went to church, and it was a kind of a social place. And these were
Yes.
good people and whatnot. And I'm a professional, and I've done a lot of assessments for everything from people who've had personal injury or are suing somebody in court, through assessments for offenders who've done very violent and terrible things for the National Parole Board and Correctional Service of Canada. So, they tap you on the shoulder and they say, hey, you've got some skills. Could we use you? And I think, oh, what the heck? These are nice people. I'm going to contribute. So I ended up doing assessments of people who wanted to be clergy and wanted to be in positions of leadership. And as I was going through that process, I'm in contact with bishops and archdeacons and various other levels of clergy. And the bishop of what's called Rupert's Land, which is all of that territory that the Hudson Bay controlled, was also the bishop of Saskatoon. And as I'm going through this, I said, I don't mind naming names here, but Bishop Tom Morgan, a good fellow, hard-headed, decent man. I said to Tom, I went to this school in Manitoba, and there's a number of them. There's one in Ontario, which won't concern us at the moment because it's not part of Rupert's Land, but the one in Winnipeg is. And I got some stuff to tell you. And so Tom Morgan, Archbishop of Rupert's Land, Tom Morgan, took this information, digested it for probably no more than about 6 weeks, and he said, I want to go on a road trip with you, and I want us to, me and the Bishop of Edmonton, which was responsible, for the diocese where St. John's School of Alberta is, Victoria Matthews, who then became the primate later of the Anglican Church in New Zealand. So we're talking knowledgeable leadership, top of the chain, the food chain in the Anglican Church people. They're listening to me talk about my experiences at St. John's School of Alberta. And, I'm being fairly, blunt about, my assessment as a professional, tell them about some of my personal concerns. What followed after that meeting is Victoria Matthews, Bishop of Edmonton. Bishop Matthews of Edmonton goes to the St. John's administration, and she told me this. She called me, and I had some multiple conversations with her and Archbishop Tom Morgan about the school, St. John's School of Alberta, would not deal with her at all, did not want to talk about any of it. And basically, the message I got is they were intimidated and fearful that of me, that I was a threat. And I made it plain that, yeah, you know, I'm not a threat. I understand all of this. I will have a conversation without prejudice, without any hint of anything. I've got no axes to grind. I'm a mature professional, highly successful. You know, there's nothing for me except that you're doing some things wrong. And if you're going to continue to run, you should be cleaning up your bloody act. That was where I was coming from at that point. And I'm just into, you know, I'm in the midst of doing Indian residential school assessments for, you know, it's agreement amongst the individual and the, you know, federal Department of Justice to do assessments. So I've got knowledge both from a personal perspective, from a professional practice perspective, and I'm thinking about in the future. We have this principle in psychology that if you see enough of the same problem, you need to go and find out what's causing it. And they talk about this people floating in a river. You pull them out because they're drowning. You know, warm them up, dry them off, feed them. And then the next day there's another person in the river. So there's multiple people floating down the river. Eventually you got to go up the bloody river, walk up the bank. Where the hell are they falling in? Or is somebody bloody well pushing them in? Like, where is this coming from?
Indeed,
That's my motivation. And I'm, you know, professionally, I'm one of these people who very much endorses that, of trying to improve, you know, what the general functioning of things is. So St. John's, I mean, did I want St. John's to continue to operate? Certainly not the way it was. And I mean, it closed down, and I have no idea. You know, I'm told that my conversations with the Anglican Church hierarchy was probably a factor in the Company of the Cross, which ran the schools, and probably the Anglican Church and the schools having more of a severe break. But frankly, the way things work in Churchland is they have sort of agreements that aren't really well thought out. They're not well articulated. There's nothing written down. They're kind of, you know, we're nice people. Like when I was at St. John's, they would make us all sing, and we went to Anglican churches with our little white turtlenecks, and we sang Christmas carols, and people in the church would listen to this and feel very, very good about, you know, a bunch of soldiers of Christ singing lovely Christmas, you know, boys singing nicely is a
but that's
you know,
there's a symbol in one of the photographs. I'm not sure if it was in the book, the self-serving book by Barb McKay and Mike Maunder. Lots of good photographs in there, but not much in the way
I feel
of,
the way, isn't it called I Feel the Winds or something like that?
Yeah, it's somewhere around here. Anyway, whatever. It's a big coffee table book kind of thing, with very little in the way of criticism or introspective analysis, nothing like that. Anyways, if there's a picture of the Archbishop of Canterbury visiting Canada at one stage, or maybe several stages, I don't know. And there's the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he's walking along in Manitoba, somewhere in Manitoba, and there's all the boys are gathered around, and he's meeting them, talking with them, and shaking their hands and everything. And I'm thinking, you know what? There's something wrong here. There's something wrong here. What does this guy know? What does this guy know?
He wouldn't have known anything.
But
somebody in those senior places, and you've spoken with some of them. You mentioned Morgan and Matthews and others. I talked with them, and I didn't talk with them. I talked with Ken Genge, and some of the others in Manitoba, Bishop Valentine and Bishop Jones.
Ken Genge, just to clarify, Ken Genge was a bishop in I think in Edmonton or Calgary. I can't recall.
In Edmonton.
In Edmonton.
In Edmonton.
So his brother Gary Genge was an executive archdeacon in the in the Diocese of Saskatoon. So
Oh,
I knew
all
him
right.
quite
Well,
well.
in the family.
A very, very nice fellow.
Yeah. I scrawled some notes down before we meet here today because you know, the time approaches. I'd like to talk more and more about this, but instead I wrote a book. Okay, I gotta flag the book. Okay, there's the book. There's the book.
No,
The
and
book.
the book should be
That's
flogged.
the book.
I
Okay.
pulled it up. I pulled it up. If you want a paper copy in Canada, it's only $30 and they'll deliver it to you. I mean, Christmas is coming. This is an ideal time to get a book. And all those people in your family, like the St. Johnnies that are out there, the old boys that are out there, you know, and your children or your spouse or, you know, extended family, your brothers and sisters don't quite understand what you went through, get them a copy of the book. You're done. Your Christmas shopping is over. $30,
Yeah.
cheap. Don't tell. It's a big fat book. It looks like it costs probably twice that, maybe $100. I don't know.
It's $30 Canadian.
$30 Canadian and delivered for God's sake. You could barely get coffee for you and a friend
Stephen
for that
and I,
cost. Cheap.
In the spirit of things, Stephen and I both chose to price the book at $30, whether it's bought in the US or Canada, i.e., we're tariffing Americans for this great knowledge and making them pay full freight. 30
Excellent.
USD, baby.
Yeah, the Kindle edition is coming up as $9.99. So if you're one of those people with a Kindle, one of those little electronic readers, for 1 cent less than $10. Good God.
Well, I just want to go back to
It's
something
too big
about
for a stocking. It's too big to put in a stocking unless you have a humongous one.
No, it'll fit in a stocking. It'll fit in a St. John stocking. Sure.
Okay.
Ken Genge, who we were speaking about earlier, when I spoke with him, I interviewed him by telephone, and one thing that troubled me along the way it didn't trouble me. I was just kind of curious, you know, look at what the church. This is nothing like the indigenous residential schools,
No.
because well, for a number of good reasons, and I certainly don't intend to compare them. It doesn't go anywhere. But something happened at the 3 St. John schools, and the church, to me, either explicitly or implicitly, didn't do what it should have done. It didn't exercise a duty of care that, at least morally, it should have. It should have moved. It should have brought something out to the public.
Well said.
Sooner and thoroughly. They should have done it. And when I asked Ken Genge, this was in the mid-90s at some point, about this, why couldn't the church have apologized at some point and said, you know, we're sorry we did this?
Liability.
And when I asked him that, I'll tell you, I'll quote from the book what he said. Here's what he said. I said about responsibility. He said, no legal responsibility. The church had none. As far as St. John's of Alberta was concerned, that was fine with me. I'm sure it was. No legal responsibility. And I figure that over a period of time, the church probably could have foreseen maybe some legal problems and disgrace developing
100%.
from its failure to act thoroughly, strongly, and promptly to be transparent and let the public know that they cared. We're not going to screw around here. There's violence happening. You can call it beatings if you want. Call it swats if you want. I don't care what you call it. When you use violence within an enclosed situation like that, let's not mince words here. That's what that is. Deal with it that way. Why can't they apologize for that? But he said, well, we had no legal responsibility. They were worried. I think they were worried about lawsuits. That's what I think they were worried about.
The lawyers would advise, and if there was a lawsuit and the church had ever expressed anything, it would be listed. as one of the parties to the lawsuit. So distancing from, like, I'm not a naive person. So when I'm talking to Bishop Morgan and Archbishop Morgan and Bishop Matthews, and I'm talking about St. John's, and they're talking that there's, no connection and the church is distance. Do I think that the bishops discussed amongst themselves that, yes, we're distanced, but let's distance more? Do I think that they did that? You're damn right I do. And did I ever discuss that?
I couldn't put it any clearer.
These are both fine people. Both of them, I would say, are, really hard-headed, straight ahead, understand things, knew what was going on, but they have responsibilities to the corporate structure of the church, the financial structure, and the people. And if I may say, in churchland today, I see less focus on the people and more on the corporate and financial structure. Churches are struggling, and it's a business. And, we look at schools right now there's been increased funding in at least Saskatchewan and Alberta and Ontario. There's been increased funding that if St. John's were to restart, they could get up to 75% in Saskatchewan if they were qualified at the highest level. And Alberta, I believe, wants to move to an American voucher system where if your child is going to a private school that's accredited by the government, you can sign your voucher over, basically your tax form for your school taxes, over to the school, and they will get that money. And it will bypass the Department of Education entirely. So we have something going on here that, the St. John schools have died, but we have others that they don't have the outdoor program, but they are religiously inclined. And if I may say, not a diagnosis, they're crazy. And the system from government is crazy, to the point that we have, and I won't be too specific about this, but can you imagine a minister of education who doesn't have their children in public schools, but is increasing the funding of private schools so that their children can be subsidized, and that minister can pay less for their own children to go to a private school? Can you imagine?
Self-serving greed. I don't know.
But they're good. But this is good Christian, ways of operating.
Well, I just want to say something about the Anglican Church, because you guys have been talking about it. And I know that even for the book, you interviewed James, right, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm in the book. Stephen thankfully had a copy of the letter that I originally sent and provoked my discussions. I probably have it somewhere in the many places, but it was nice that Stephen was organized to have it. Yeah. We spoke at length. Yeah. You interviewed me a couple of times, actually, and we spoke about a whole bunch of things. And as I read through the book, you and I spoke about some of those things, and we had spoken to some of the same people, because I'm a psychologist in practice for many years, and I have spoken to, I think my count may not be entirely correct, but I think it's 63 old boys have contacted me over the years to talk about, I'm struggling in life. I'm a little crazy. I've got these problems. What's going on? And, I can't be their care provider, but I can say to them, yeah, you're not crazy. I went through it too. And here's what you need to understand. And you need to get yourself some help. And, there's some basic, what we call psychoeducation that you can give about how to manage things that, we're talking about trauma now, and we hear about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and people are trying to be trauma informed. What happens with trauma is past experiences that are potent in terms of your physical experience and your psychological experience will come back to you and be provoked or triggered by other things you experience. And so people would be troubled. They're functioning extremely well in life, but then something happens to trigger them into a symptom response. And they need some help in terms of mastering that. And it's very similar to the kind of post-traumatic stress therapy that people who have been in war zones will get, or first responders who've been to places where life has been lost or life has been threatened. There's some good good methods. So those who are listening to this who need some help, reach out to care providers. Trauma is well known, and it is in the trauma spectrum. You can self-diagnose if you want, but I'll just say that many St. John's old boys have problems that are haunting them in the trauma spectrum. And trauma and the word haunt and the word dream all derive from common roots. So think about yourself as haunted if you don't like the word trauma, or think of yourself as having some sort of living nightmares sometimes if you prefer that way of thinking about things in terms of bad dreams.
Yeah.
So 63 old boys.
I think that's the count. It could be 61, it could be 64. I don't, I stopped count. You count for a while, but then you don't.
So there
One
were
of the boys who had years of trouble dealing with it and became a close friend of mine was Rick Weens.
Yeah.
And without going into too much detail about it, Rick was one of the sons of the founder of the St. John's School, Frank Weens. And they were estranged pretty much from the time that he went there until the time that his father died a few years ago. Nightmares, counseling, a lot of that through the years, that from the time he was in the school and following on from the years afterwards. And he finally, with the help of his family, was able to resolve most of that. Rick and I became, as I say, close friends, and he was for years. We go socially with our wives and friends and stuff like that. And he was a good, fine man, and I miss him terribly.
And if I may say, when we talk about specific names, I become silent at that point. Although I don't have relationships on an official way, I can't really talk about specifics. That's one of the professional things with us dealing with people who are struggling in life about anything at all, whether it's the worried well or people who have serious problems. It doesn't matter the context.
Another person, and as I say, I am conscious of the time going by here, so I'll keep this tight. Another person who recently contacted me through Pierre, anyways, was Sandy Kane, the wife of Peter Kane, who was a teacher at all three schools at one point, one after another, and was well versed in what St. John's was all about, and was very helpful to me during interviews and in providing certain stuff to me, which I shan't go into. Sandy got hold of me about, I don't know, 5 or 6 days ago, I guess, and she had read the book, and I'm pleased to say that she was very positive about it. It was great to hear from her after all those years, from when I met her at her home and interviewed her a couple of times and met the children and all this. These are personal things that were such a bonus to me. I met so many people, and I can't say I always served them well. And the way it's written in the book, they may not agree with some of the things that I have to say, or the opinions that I raised based on the information that I had, not necessarily from them, but from others in the school. Nonetheless, that personal connection was such a bonus to me, and I could apologize now for having taken so long to get the book published. It's for them that I did it, for the boys at Temiskaming, especially in the families that had to go through as much grief as they did through the years of connecting their boys with St. John's.
If it's not documented, and this book is extremely well documented, if something isn't documented, it gets lost to time, right? People move on in life, they pass away, they, grow older. Things will be lost if not documented. So I look at this as, we have a contained document that has so much information. And frankly, I'm sure there could be at least one more book, if not two, of the same size to document more things.
Well, there could certainly be some true crime action with some of our friends who managed to make it to the Supreme Court.
Yes, we've talked about that in a previous podcast,
Podcast, yes. So
where
we don't need.
a teacher who had committed sexual offenses had a reduced offense or reduced sentence by an Alberta court. And it went to the Supreme Court, who basically did, and this isn't legal terms, obviously, but did a WTF on it and said, like, there's, the reasoning here is completely faulty. And I have to say, not knowing anything, you start to wonder, you've got people like Ted Byfield, you've got people who are in the top echelon of political and business communities in Alberta who are connected, and you wonder about, court is supposed to be independent, but you kind of wonder, is there some sort of group think going on in some provinces around, was the sentence reduced because there were political connections involved with, and I can't really say that I know anything, but it would be a lovely piece of investigative journalism if it could ever come out that this actually occurred.
You don't need
it's
to
a
say,
it's a stuff of almost a spy thriller to me, but
you don't need to say anything because they had a sitting judge on the Alberta court. On a sitting Alberta judge wrote a pederast, a letter of
character support. Yeah,
support.
character support.
A
That,
convicted. I guess he wasn't
Convict-
convicted then, but he is now, and it pleasures me in a way to say a convicted pederast. Because you know what? People get called pedos all the time.
Well, and if I may say that
is...
that pro-social sexual offenders, okay, they abound. We've got this scandal right now going across the United States where you have people who are at high levels of business, are very personable, jolly, and good friends who are doing heinous sexual and violent things to people.
Yeah.
Being of good character doesn't mean a damn thing about the hidden perverted behavior you might be up to in your private life.
Well, it's a long and sordid story. And my point was there's just so much in this book that, we can unpack. And it is I really felt my job on it, editing it, was to make sure that this was there for the future. I have an innate sense of all our mortalities. And, to me, this is something good for society to have out there, just so it is said. And you know what? You can argue against it. You can say, yeah,
well, I'm going to say,
Stephen didn't do it right, or he didn't capture it correctly. But overall, the overwhelming body of work in this thing is very equal. The fact that people like Sandy and others who are tied to the Temiskaming tragedy like this book, have read it and liked it. The Temiskaming, I mean, there's just so much with this book that's great. That's all.
There's an old saying that World War II, had a lot of good music in it, but it wasn't primarily a musical. Okay, so all of us who went to St. John's, did we gain things from this, even though that may not be what we should have gained? Yes.
Yes.
I disliked my time there, but did I gain things? Well, frankly, nobody can do anything to me that really scares me because I've experienced it all.
Well, for me, it helped me finish this book.
I get it, James.
It helped me finish this book because, as a St. John's boy, I get shit done.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it helps me get up earlier than I'd want to be on a podcast this morning. Exactly. Oh, you got to get up and do this, and I've got a few things to do before a podcast because that has to happen before, basically daybreak out here. So sure, no problem.
I wanted to make a last point about the Anglican Church because I know we talked about that, but to me, the Anglican Church was a lot like the Catholic Church at the time that St. John's was founded.
100%. 100%.
Right? They were deep in the residential schools because they were deep with the government. I mean, there was no difference. There was no dividing line in Quebec between the Roman Catholic Church and the government. I doubt there was really a dividing line in Western Canada between the
certainly in Manitoba. It definitely, and I lived in Winnipeg for a while. There definitely was a stronger connection. As you move west, the Anglican Church has this other evangelical bent within it. They call them con-evos, which is conservative evangelicals. It almost sounds like convicted evil, but it's con-evo. That's the terminology. So you have the sort of stalwart, thee and thou, quick and the dead kind of Shakespearean language Anglican Church. And then you have the updated, give your heart to Jesus kind of Anglican. And those are two strong streams within the Anglican Church in Canada and around the world, no question. And right now, the con-evos are winning.
And you're right. And but the Anglican Church was powerful. And I don't know if you caught it, Stephen, in your writing, but you sort of document its downfall in the sense that it didn't really have any power. The Company of the Cross, in fact, after Grenville, right? Like there was resentment between the Company of the Cross and the actual operations of the schools.
Yes.
It became, there was tension between those two. And frankly, the Anglican Church just wanted to check out. I mean, I have a feeling that when you met with them, they saw you walking in the door, James, and just said, "Oh shit."
No, they knew. I had reassured them that I was no threat, and I had volunteered to declare in writing that I was no threat. But I'd like to have a conversation. Never occurred. I had the information specifically that specific personnel were not wanting to speak with me, were intimidated and frightened were the words, and those two words were used by Bishop Matthews. I'm in a situation here where I'm trying to be respectful. I don't want to call somebody a coward to their face, or even in a podcast where they can't defend themselves. But this was the information, and frankly, you talked about the lawyers telling Bishop Genge that probably we have no responsibility as the party line. That's I understand that lawyers do kind of tell you that you can't do something for fiscal reasons or reasons of being sued, that maybe on a moral basis you would like to. So I respect these people, and I think about some of do I think that the teachers and personnel of St. John's were inherently bad or evil or something? Absolutely not. I think that they just deliberately blindsided themselves to some things that they were not really entitled to deliberately blindside themselves to, that they should have known better. There was enough knowledge at that point that they should have known better.
Absolutely.
And so this is the problem. This is the problem of not being willing to pay attention to things that are staring you in the face. And when something bad happens, you have to say, is this in fact something that we should pay attention to and change ourselves? So the first time something happens, it's this something happens once. Okay, fool me once, but if you keep getting fooled on something, you need to pay attention and say there's something actually wrong. And there's enough data points for St. John's to know that there was something wrong and that they should have corrected some things. That it took Temiskaming for them to decide they needed to have, everything from satellite phones to life-saving equipment and be informed properly. That's not acceptable. I've spoken to people in Canoeing, Ontario in the past about Temiskaming, and I spoke to a fellow now deceased that he was heavily involved with this after from the mid 1960s. In 1967, we had a big push around the 100th anniversary of Canada, and there was canoe races, etc. And there was a whole push around canoeing and understanding things to be safe and documentation of canoe routes. So the information was available certainly by about 1970 that the school should have known what they were doing. And,
they would have, except for one thing though, James. They'd cut themselves off from the world. But the initial
bloody hell,
years, early years of the St. John's movement were years in which they not only disowned the liberal material world around them, they spurned it, they dissed it thoroughly. There's nothing the outside world could teach them that they couldn't learn and do for themselves. That was their attitude, and they said so. They said so.
Egregiously wrong. egregiously, deliberately to blindside yourself and then have disaster happen, yeah, that's really bad.
It
There
is.
was a discussion. What got to me, Stephen, was a discussion in a meeting that you brought up where they talked about putting life rafts in the bows of canoes. I mean, they discussed this well before Temiskaming, and it just dropped. It just dropped.
Well, and you see, I think that came out of probably the Canoeing Ontario study of canoeing as they're doing this cross Canada stuff and getting ready for the, Centennial of Canada. They had all this information. It was available, readily available, and given away. This was not you had to pay for people to come along.
Well,
they have given them all the material about how to prepare and what to do.
In that particular case of the life rafts and the school, the leadership delegated one of the headmasters, Keith Bennett, to look into this matter of life rafts, and he did so, and he came back with a report. Now, I haven't seen what report he gave, and there was nothing in the minutes or records that I could find that said, here's what I found, except that they in turn said to the leaders of each of the 3 schools at that time, it's up to you to look out, see what you can find out there, and do what you can. And it was just left. It was gone.
Well, it was an economic decision. It was an economic decision. They were always robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
The students
and of
were,
course,
we were sent out to Eaton's trucks to deliver Christmas catalogs.
Yes.
We sold meat door to door. We slaughtered chickens. We cleaned what the hell? It was economic, right?
I think it may have been economic, but I disagree with you to this extent. There was so much disorganization from time to time, and sometimes continuously for long periods of time in all aspects of management at the schools, that the expression of fell through the cracks, that serves my purposes quite well in terms of saying, here's what I think happened. Happened. And not to be too or sound too cynical about it, because I don't regard myself as a cynic, as a cynic, but as a skeptic. That after Temiskaming, they felt it was incumbent at the Ontario school that Mike Maunder, who became a headmaster of the school, and Peter Kane, of course, who was the number 2 or number 1 guy, whatever you want to call it, at the Temiskaming Brigade. Somebody phoned up the Globe and Mail and said, hey, have you heard what they're doing? The Globe and Mail sent a photographer, and they got Mike there, and they got Peter Kane there with, guess what? An inflatable life raft right in front of the Claremont School. And here they are. Don't think we don't take that accident seriously. We do. Here we are with our life raft. Just a second. Isn't this the same kind of thing that you guys were discussing like 2 or 3 years before Temiskaming? You knew all about it then. You talked about it. You delegated responsibility for finding it out, that each of the headmasters was supposed to do something. And then Temiskaming happened. And here you are after the fact saying, look what we got, a life raft.
Well, and I'm going to speak just briefly to something in this same context. This podcast is going on longer than we scheduled, but there was a program of the federal government right after or during the Canada Centennial in 1967, and it went well into the 70s, called the Opportunities for Youth, OFY. And organizations who were doing outdoor things could apply for federal money. I mean, I took surfing lessons at Long Beach, Vancouver Island with surfboards and wetsuits belonging to the federal government that had been part of the OFY program. They'd park a van and give you free Tofino. Oh. Yeah, sorry, podcast listeners. I think I've got dirt in the earphone connection, but I took surfing lessons in Tofino, Vancouver Island, in 8-degree water, wearing wetsuits with cold water hoods on them because we could freeze to death. And this was free under federal programming. So, that they were saying it was an expense. They would have had to apply to the government of the day for a grant and meet the requirements of the grant, which would have required them to be safe. And, probably it was a liberal government. I don't know.
It must have been a liberal government. Obviously, it's a liberal government, Come on.
Bureaucracy.
But they could have
And
gotten.
I
I'm
have no more
convinced.
to, I have no more to say, except could I finish with Ted Byfield?
Absolutely. Yeah, we should wrap
Absolutely.
this up.
Okay, let me grab this, and I'm going to read this, okay? But I'll try to read it as well as I can, because when I interviewed, I asked him about Temiskaming. You know, I said to him, and this is a transcript from the tape, so it's accurate. Was there in the whole practice leading up to what happened at Temiskaming a degree of pride there? And he said, probably. I'm not conscious of it, but since it dominates so many things I do, it would be undoubtedly lurking there somewhere. They don't call it the great sin for nothing. I don't know what things would have been any different if I had been there at Temiskaming. In other words, I'm not saying, well, if I'd been there, it wouldn't have happened. If I had been there, it could just as easily as happened because of this, I guess you suggested arrogance. And that's as good a word as any. Sort of a contempt for form, order, discipline, bureaucratic discipline, and that sort of thing. We were disdainful of those things. And that's a real fault. And in the end, the price is paid in blood. That's the way it is. Now, don't make me comment on whether it was done right or wrong on Temiskaming, because I don't want to say that. All I know is that the routines that should have been in place weren't. And the reason that they weren't in place was Ted Byfield, in other words, my Ted Byfield's contempt for bureaucratic procedures. And that's why those bodies are there. If you want a confession, there's your confession.
Well, with that, boys,
I'll just say WTF to that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to need to do it again. And Stephen, thank you for doing this. This is like your first live podcast. With Bedard's Unofficial Podcast, and I'm sure there'll be more. Your
Excellent
book is
an excellent book.
There's so much to unpack.
Thank you very much for your kind words, James.
About St. John and those who don't know anything about St. John's, have never heard of it, should get it as well, because there's enough there to acquaint you with what was going on, and it'll help you understand the history, but it also tells you something about the present, because we're dealing with these very issues right now across North America, perhaps other places in the world, but certainly Canada and the United States.
Where people think they're right and impose, whatever system of rules that they think or not.
Their ideology, whether it's religious or based on something else.
Exactly.
Scary times.
All right, Stephen, James, thank you very much. And we will see you guys soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye, James. Bye-bye.